The warship Throne of Silence was the largest vessel ever built by the Galactic Hegemony. It stretched across the darkness of space like a floating city, carrying within it the pride of an empire that had swallowed 4,000 worlds. On its command bridge, surrounded by 200 officers from a dozen conquered species, Grand Commander Velas stood tall and addressed his fleet. "The Sol system," he said, pointing one long finger at the holographic star map that floated before them. "A single star, 8 planets. One of them holds life, one of them holds resources we need, and one of them holds a species that has never once stepped beyond its own little rock." A ripple of laughter moved through the officers. Velas enjoyed it. He had built his career on easy victories and grand speeches, and this campaign would be no different. The intelligence reports had been clear. The humans of Earth were a young species. They had no colonies, no interstellar fleet, no alliances. They sat alone on their world like an animal that had never learned to leave its cave. "We will arrive, we will land, and we will take what we need," Velas continued. "I expect this operation to last no more than 10 planetary rotations. Urun, what is your assessment?" Tactician Urun, a thin creature with 4 arms and a mind built for numbers, stepped forward and bowed. "Grand Commander, based on all available intelligence, the humans possess only basic orbital infrastructure. Their weapons technology is crude by our standards. Their population, while large, is not united under a single government. I estimate full planetary submission within 7 rotations, 10 at most." Velas smiled. "You see? This is not a war. This is a collection." But not everyone on the bridge was smiling. In the second row of officers, Sub-Commander Drenna stood perfectly still. She had not laughed at the Grand Commander's jokes. She had not nodded when Urun gave his assessment. She had spent the last 3 cycles doing something none of them had bothered to do. She had studied the humans. After the briefing ended, Drenna requested a private meeting with Velas. He granted it, though his expression made it clear he found her concern tiresome. "Speak," he said, settling into his command chair. Drenna placed a data tablet on the table between them. "Grand Commander, I have been reviewing intercepted transmissions from the human world. Cultural records, historical archives, biological surveys. I believe our intelligence assessments are dangerously incomplete." Velas raised one eyebrow. "Go on." "The humans have been waging war against each other for their entire recorded history," Drenna said. "Not border disputes, not trade conflicts, total wars. Wars that killed millions of their own kind. They have burned their own cities. They have poisoned their own land. They have split the atom and used it as a weapon against themselves. And after every catastrophe, every plague, every disaster that should have ended them, they rebuilt. Every single time." Velas waved a hand. "So they are violent and primitive. This is not new information." "There is more," Drenna pressed. "Their planet, Earth. It is classified as a Class-15 Deathworld." The room went quiet. Velas stared at her. "That classification is an error," he said flatly. "I verified it 3 times, Grand Commander. It is not an error. Earth has active tectonic plates that tear the ground apart. It has storms that carry winds fast enough to rip apart our standard field shelters. Its oceans cover 70% of the surface and contain pressures that would crush our deep space hulls. The planet has millions of species of life, and a significant number of them are predators. The humans share their world with creatures that could kill them easily, and instead of exterminating these creatures, they keep some of them as companions. They sleep beside animals that have teeth designed to tear flesh." Velas was quiet for a moment. Then he leaned back in his chair and folded his arms. "If this world is so terrible," he said slowly, "and if these humans are so dangerous, then explain something to me, Sub-Commander. Why have they not conquered anything? Why are they still sitting on one planet?" Drenna had expected this question. She had an answer, and it was the answer that frightened her most. "Because, Grand Commander, Nothing out here has been worth their attention yet. Velas stared at her for a long time. Then he stood up, straightened his uniform, and walked to the door. Your concern is noted, Drenna. The fleet will advance as planned. He paused at the threshold. And I suggest you keep these opinions to yourself. Fear is a disease, and I will not allow it to spread through my officers. The door closed behind him. Drenna stood alone in the room, staring at the data tablet and the files she had spent months compiling. She had done everything she could. She had presented the evidence, and it had not mattered. She picked up the tablet and scrolled to one last file. It was a human photograph, a single image captured from an intercepted broadcast. It showed a human female standing on top of a mountain. Behind her, storm clouds gathered. Below her, a valley of green stretched to the horizon. Snow clung to her hair, and ice coated her clothing. She was smiling. Drenna stared at that smile for a long time. That was the smile of a creature that had climbed to the top of the most dangerous world in the known galaxy, and found it beautiful. That was the smile of something that did not fear its own planet, because its planet had spent millions of years trying to kill it, and had failed. She closed the file and walked back to her station. 12,000 warships turned toward the Sol system and began their approach. Far away, on the blue and green world that spun quietly around its yellow star, a young officer named Park Juwon noticed something strange on his sensor display. A disturbance in hyperspace. A big one. He checked the readings twice, then 3 times, then picked up his communicator with steady hands. Captain Han Do-yun, he said, "We have a fleet-level hyperspace exit event beyond the Oort cloud. Estimated vessel count is in the thousands." There was a pause on the other end. Then Do-yun's calm voice came through. "Send a message. Every galactic trade language we have. 1 transmission." Juwon's fingers moved across the controls. "What should it say, Captain?" Do-yun's response was simple and quiet. "This is Earth. You are approaching a Class-15 Deathworld. Turn back. You will not be warned again." The message flew outward at the speed of light. The Hegemony fleet did not respond. The stars were silent. And on Earth, Captain Han Do-hyun looked out the observation window of Baekdu Station at the world below, turned to his second-in-command, Yoon Nari, and said 2 words. The Hegemony fleet crossed the edge of the Sol system like a dark wave rolling through empty water. 12,000 warships moved in perfect formation, their engines glowing faintly against the black emptiness between the stars. Grand Commander Velos stood on his bridge and watched the distant sun grow brighter with each passing hour. They passed the outer planets first: Neptune, Uranus, Saturn with its ancient rings, Jupiter with its massive storms. At each point, Tactician Orun scanned for defensive stations, weapons platforms, sensor networks, anything that would suggest the humans had prepared for visitors. He found nothing. No orbital platforms, Orun reported with satisfaction. No weapons satellites, no minefields, no communication relays. The outer system is completely empty. Velos nodded. A species that cannot even leave its own planet does not build defenses in deep space. But behind them, Sub-Commander Drenna was looking at the same data with very different eyes. She did not see emptiness, she saw cleanliness. Every spacefaring civilization left traces in its home system. Debris from old launches, abandoned stations, dead satellites, failed experiments. The space around any inhabited world was always cluttered with the leftovers of progress. The Sol system had none of that. It was perfectly, impossibly clean. And that meant one of 2 things. Either the humans had never built anything in space, which contradicted the orbital station they had already detected near Earth, or the humans had cleaned up after themselves so thoroughly that nothing could be found. Drenna did not know which possibility was worse. Veloz had made his orders clear. On Earth, the response to the approaching fleet was not what the hegemony would have expected. There was no panic, no emergency broadcasts filled with screaming voices, no governments collapsing under the weight of fear. Instead, something far more dangerous happened. The humans organized. Captain Han Do-hyun activated what was known as the Homeland Protocol. It was a document that had been written, rewritten, tested, and perfected over the course of 200 years. Every nation on Earth had contributed to it. Every military force had trained for it. It was the answer to a question that humanity had been asking itself ever since it first looked up at the stars and wondered if something might one day come down. Within 6 hours of the fleet being detected, every government on Earth had placed its military forces under a single unified command structure. Armies that had spent decades pointing weapons at each other turned those weapons outward. Old enemies became allies in the time it took to make a phone call. This was the part that no alien species would ever truly understand about humans. They fought each other constantly, brutally, and without mercy. But the moment something from outside threatened their world, every single conflict was put on hold, every grudge was forgotten, and the entire species became one thing: a fist. Sergeant Major Kwon Tae-sun received his orders on a rainy morning in a mountain base, buried deep under rock and steel. He read them once, folded the paper, and looked at the men and women assembled before him. 600,000 ground troops across 6 continents, all reporting to him. "We have guests coming," he told them. "They did not call ahead, they did not bring gifts, and they did not listen when we told them to leave. So we will teach them why nothing visits Earth." Across the ocean, in a laboratory that smelled of soil and growing things, Chief Science Officer Shin Eun-ji was already at work. She was not building a weapon. She was opening jars. Dozens of sealed containers lined her shelves, each one holding samples of the most common organisms on Earth. Bacteria, fungal spores, simple molds, ordinary things that humans barely thought about. Things that were everywhere on Earth. Things that no alien immune system had ever encountered. She looked at the samples and smiled a small, tired smile. The hegemony had spent centuries developing weapons of war. Energy beams and particle cannons and gravity bombs. Humanity's most powerful weapon had been growing in bread boxes and shower corners since before civilization began. As the fleet crossed the orbit of Mars, Do-hyun made one last attempt. He ordered Park Ju-won to send a data package to the hegemony flagship. Not a threat, just information. The package contained Earth's full planetary profile, atmospheric composition with its high oxygen content, seismic activity records showing constant tectonic movement, ocean depth measurements reaching places where the pressure could crush starship armor, a complete catalog of Earth's estimated 8.7 million species, with special attention given to the predators, the parasites, and the pathogens. At the end of the data package, Shin Eun-ji had attached a personal note. It read, "Attached is a summary of what lives here. We are the least dangerous thing on this planet." On the throne of silence, the data package arrived and was reviewed. Urun opened it, scanned the first few pages, and laughed out loud. He showed it to several officers, and they laughed too. A planet with moving ground, and angry oceans, and tiny invisible organisms. How frightening. She opened the file on her personal terminal and began reading it carefully. She read about the storms first. Hurricanes that stretched across hundreds of miles, carrying winds that could tear metal apart. Tornadoes that appeared without warning and destroyed everything they touched. Lightning that struck the ground millions of times every year with enough energy to stop a heart. Then she read about the oceans. 71% of the surface, the file said. The humans had not even fully explored their own oceans. There were places in the deep water where no light reached, and the pressure was so extreme that only the strangest, most adapted creatures could survive. Things with no eyes, things with teeth longer than their bodies, things that glowed in the dark and drifted through a world of permanent night. Then she read about the bacteria, trillions of microscopic organisms that lived everywhere on Earth, in the soil, in the water, in the air, inside the humans themselves. Most of them were harmless to humans. Some of them were even helpful. But to a species that had never encountered them before, with immune systems that had no idea what they were, even the most common Earth bacterium could become a death sentence. Drenna closed the file. Her hands were shaking. She looked across the bridge at Veloz, who was giving orders for the invasion, with the casual confidence of someone who had never been wrong in his life. She wanted to stand up and scream at him. She wanted to grab the data package and force him to read every word. She wanted to tell him that they were not approaching a planet. They were approaching a machine designed by millions of years of evolution to kill anything that was not strong enough to survive it. And the humans had not only survived it, they had climbed to the top of the most hostile environment in the known galaxy and made it their home. But she did not scream. She did not stand. She sat at her station and watched the blue and green planet grow larger in the viewport. And she felt something that no hegemony officer had felt in 1,000 years of easy conquest. She felt afraid. Veloz turned to his bridge crew and raised one hand. All ships, begin invasion deployment. Landing forces, prepare for planetfall. Today we add another world to the hegemony. The fleet moved forward. The dropships began to launch. 12,000 warships darkened the sky above Earth. And below them, on a world of fire and ice and storms and teeth, 8 billion humans looked up and waited. The first thing the hegemony fleet noticed when it settled into orbit around Earth was the radiation. Their sensors had warned them about the planet's star, but the reality was worse than the numbers. The yellow sun poured energy across the electromagnetic spectrum with a violence that made hegemony engineers nervous. Earth's magnetic field provided some protection to the surface below, but for the ships in orbit, it was a different story. The same magnetic field that shielded the humans began to interfere with hegemony targeting systems, bending sensor beams, and scrambling precision instruments that had worked perfectly in every other star system. Within 3 hours of entering orbit, 17 ships reported navigation errors. Within 6 hours, 32 ships reported shield fluctuations. Within 12 hours, the fleet's medical officers began logging increased radiation exposure among crew members on the sunward side of the formation. Captain Han Do-hyun watched all of this from Baekdu Station. He watched the alien fleet struggle with things that humans had dealt with since their first satellites. He watched and he waited. Yun-Nari stood beside him, her tactical display showing the positions of every enemy vessel, every dropship bay, every weapon port. They are preparing to launch landing craft, she said. Let them launch, Do-hyun replied. Nari looked at him. Sir? Let them commit. Let them put their soldiers in small ships and send them down into the atmosphere. Then we will show them what our atmosphere does. The first wave of hegemony dropships launched at dawn over the Pacific Ocean. 800 craft, each carrying 50 soldiers, descended toward the planet in tight formation. They hit the upper atmosphere and immediately began to shake. The turbulence was beyond anything their pilots had trained for. Earth's atmosphere was thick, heavy, and alive with energy. Wind currents tore at the formation. Static electricity danced across hull plating. 2 dropships collided in the chaos and broke apart, scattering burning debris across the sky. Then, Nari activated the orbital defense grid. The hegemony had scanned for weapons platforms and found nothing. They had been looking for the wrong things. They had been looking for the kind of defenses they understood. Large stations with visible gun ports and energy signatures. What they had missed were the thousands of small, dark, cold objects drifting in orbits that matched common space debris. Rocks with machines inside them, dead satellites that were not dead at all, a network of kinetic impactors that had been sleeping in the dark for decades, waiting for a single activation signal. Nari sent the signal. The sky above Earth lit up. Tungsten rods accelerated to incredible speeds, slammed into the dropship formation. There was no explosion, no flash of energy weapons, just pure physics. Mass times velocity. The rods punched through hegemony armor like needles through wet paper. 800 dropships became fewer than 200 in 90 seconds. But the hegemony had numbers. More dropships launched, thousands more. They came down in waves, and enough of them made it through the fire to reach the surface. Hegemony soldiers touched down on 3 continents, established forward bases, and prepared to begin the conquest of Earth. That was when the planet itself joined the fight. The first enemy to greet the invaders was gravity. Earth pulled at them with a force 1.4 times stronger than what their bodies had evolved for. Every step was heavier. Every movement cost more energy. Soldiers in full combat armor began to feel the strain within the first hour. Joints ached, spines compressed. Muscles that had never worked this hard began to fail. By the end of the first day, hegemony medics were treating hundreds of soldiers for stress fractures in their legs and feet. The second enemy was the air itself. Earth's atmosphere contained more oxygen than any hegemony species was built to process. In small amounts, over short periods, it was tolerable. But hour after hour, breathing the rich, heavy air of Earth, alien soldiers began to experience something their medics had never seen. Slow confusion, difficulty concentrating, mild euphoria followed by headaches and poor decision-making. They were being poisoned by the very air they breathed, and they did not even realize it. The third enemy arrived without warning on the second day. A massive rotating storm system made landfall on the coastal invasion zone in the southern hemisphere. The hegemony had no word for hurricane. Their homeworlds had calm atmospheres and gentle weather. When winds exceeding 200 kilometers per hour slammed into their forward base, they had no protocol and no defense. Field shelters were torn from the ground and thrown like toys. Supply containers were scattered across miles of coastline. Soldiers who tried to stand in the open were knocked flat and dragged across mud and rock. And then came the wildlife. A hegemony battalion that had established a base in a dense northern forest reported contact with unknown hostile organisms on the second night. Not humans, animals. The soldiers had set up camp in territory claimed by creatures the humans called bears. The bears did not care that these invaders came from the stars. They cared that something large and strange was in their territory. And they responded the way bears have always responded. They attacked. The hegemony soldiers fired their weapons. They killed 2 bears. 6 more came. Then wolves arrived, drawn by the noise and the scent of alien blood. Then boar, territorial and aggressive, crashed through the undergrowth and into the camp. The battalion pulled back to their dropships and sealed the doors. They refused to come out. Their commander sent a message to the fleet. The forest is hostile. Repeat, the forest itself is hostile. He did not yet understand how right he was. The worst enemy was invisible. Within 48 hours of landing on Earth, hegemony soldiers began getting sick. It started with small things: skin irritation, coughing, fever. Then it got worse. Common Earth bacteria, organisms so ordinary that humans carried billions of them inside their own bodies without noticing, began to attack alien biology with terrible efficiency. Hegemony immune systems had never seen anything like terrestrial microorganisms. They had no defense. Simple infections that any human doctor could treat with basic medicine became life-threatening emergencies for alien soldiers, whose bodies had no idea how to fight back. Field hospitals filled within 3 days. Antibiotics from hegemony medical supplies did nothing. The bacteria were unfamiliar, unstoppable, and everywhere. In the soil, in the water, in the air, on every surface the soldiers touched. Through all of this, Quan Taesun waited. He watched from his mountain command center as the planet did his work for him. When his intelligence officers reported that enemy morale was breaking, he began his operations. Not a full attack, something worse. Small teams of human soldiers slipped through the darkness around hegemony camps. They moved at night, in rain, through terrain that the aliens had already learned to fear. They did not engage in direct combat. They cut power lines. They disabled communication equipment. They stole supplies. And they played sounds through hidden speakers in the trees. The recorded roars of lions, the howling of wolves, the deep rumbling growl of tigers. Hegemony soldiers who had already spent days fighting gravity, sickness, storms, and actual predators now sat in their camps, listening to the sounds of creatures they could not see and could not find, and their minds began to break. On the throne of silence, Grand Commander Velas read the reports in silence. Loss figures that grew every hour, sickness spreading through every ground unit, equipment failing in conditions it was never designed for. Soldiers refusing orders because they were too afraid or too sick to move. He turned to Urun. What is the highest class of Deathworld the hegemony has ever successfully invaded? Urun checked his records. His 4 hands moved slowly across his console. When he found the answer, he stopped moving entirely. Class 7, Grand Commander. Earth was Class 15. The bridge was very quiet. Outside the viewport, the beautiful blue planet turned slowly in the sunlight, peaceful and bright. And somewhere down on its surface, in the mud and the rain and the howling dark, alien soldiers were learning a lesson that the rest of the galaxy had always known. You do not invade Earth. Earth invades you. On the 5th day of the invasion, Captain Han Do-hyun gave a single order that changed everything. He stood in the command center of Baekdu Station, looked at the tactical map showing enemy positions across 3 continents, and spoke without raising his voice. They came to our house. Show them why nothing else lives here that we do not allow. The order traveled at the speed of light to every military command on the planet. And the humans, who had spent 5 days watching aliens stumble and sicken and die on their world, stopped waiting. Yun-Nari had spent those 5 days preparing. Every enemy position was mapped. Every ship in orbit was tracked. Every weakness in the hegemony formation had been studied and catalogued. She sat at her console on Baekdu Station and began issuing commands with the calm focus of someone playing a game she had already won in her head. Human fighter craft launched from places the hegemony had never thought to look. Mountain hangars, hidden beneath rock and snow, opened for the first time in decades. Doors in cliff faces swung outward, and jets screamed into the sky. Along the coastlines, submarine bays released their fleets into the deep water. Underground silos that had been sealed and silent for years cracked open and sent missiles arcing upward through the clouds. The hegemony had assumed that because humans lived on the surface, they fought on the surface. They were wrong. Humans fought from everywhere. From the sky, from under the ground, from beneath the ocean. They had spent their entire history fighting each other in every environment their planet offered, and they had gotten very, very good at all of them. The oceans became the first killing ground. Several hegemony cruisers had descended into the water, hoping to hide from orbital detection. It was a reasonable tactic in most star systems. It was a fatal mistake on Earth. Ships designed for the vacuum of space could not handle the pressure of deep water. Hulls cracked. Seals failed. 2 cruisers imploded at depth. The ones that stayed in shallow water were found by human submarines, quiet and deadly things that had been hunting in these waters for over 2 centuries. Torpedoes slammed into alien hulls, and the sea swallowed the debris. Shin Unji launched her own attack from her laboratory, and it was perhaps the most terrifying of all because it involved no weapons. She did not build a bomb or design a poison. She simply collected samples of common earth mold, the kind that grew on old bread and damp walls, and introduced the spores into the ventilation systems of grounded hegemony ships. The mold did what mold does. It grew, it spread, it ate. And what it ate were the organic compounds that the hegemony used to seal their hull joints. Within 72 hours, ships that had survived orbital combat and atmospheric entry began to fall apart from the inside. Seals rotted, joints loosened, atmosphere leaked. The hegemony engineers could not understand what was happening. Their ships were being consumed by something they could not see, could not stop, and could not kill. Eunji watched the reports come in and shook her head slowly. She had tried to tell them. She had sent them the data. Earth's smallest organisms were more dangerous than the hegemony's largest weapons. On the ground, Quan Tayson finally unleashed his forces, and the hegemony learned what human soldiers truly were. The aliens had fought other species before. They had conquered worlds where the defenders were brave, where they were organized, where they had advanced technology. But they had never fought anything like humans. Tayson's soldiers moved across terrain that should have been impassable. They fought in desert heat that reached 50 degrees. They fought in mountain snow at 40 below zero. They fought in rain so heavy it was like standing under a waterfall. They fought at night without rest and during the day without pause. They ate food that the hegemony's biological scanners classified as toxic. They drank water from rivers and streams without treatment. They were wounded and kept fighting. They were exhausted and kept moving. They were everything the planet had made them, and the planet had made them to endure. Hegemony ground forces, already weakened by gravity and sickness and fear, collapsed in hours. Bases that had taken days to build were overrun in minutes. Soldiers who had been too sick to fight surrendered in groups of hundreds. Those who tried to flee into the wilderness found that the wilderness was no safer than the battlefield. The forests were dark and full of things that hunted. The rivers were cold and fast. The mountains were steep and unforgiving. Earth did not offer mercy to those who ran, and neither did the humans who chased them. In the middle of this chaos, Sub-Commander Drenna made her decision. She had watched everything unfold exactly as she had feared. She had stood on the bridge of the Throne of Silence and listened to reports of disaster after disaster. She had watched Velos's confidence crack and crumble. She had watched Urun's calculations become meaningless, and she had realized something that filled her with a cold, heavy certainty. The hegemony was not losing this war. The hegemony had lost this war before the first shot was fired. They had lost it the moment they decided to invade a world that was better at killing than they were. She went to her private quarters, locked the door, and opened a communication channel to Baekdu Station. "This is Sub-Commander Drenna of the Hegemony Fleet," she said, her voice steady. "I wish to speak with Captain Han Do-hyun." There was a pause. Then a calm, quiet voice answered, "This is Do-hyun. I am listening." Drenna took a breath. "I tried to warn them, Captain. I told them what your world was. I told them what your species was. They did not listen." "I know," Do-hyun said. "We intercepted your report. We read it. It was accurate." "What do you want from us?" Drenna asked. There was silence for a moment. When Do-hyun spoke again, his voice was the same as it had always been, calm, patient, without anger. "We want you to leave. That is all we have ever wanted." Drenna closed her eyes. "If the hegemony surrenders, will you pursue us? Will you follow us into the galaxy? Will you come for our worlds?" Another pause, longer this time. "We have not left Earth in 10,000 years of civilization," Do-hyun said. "We are not going to start chasing you now." Then his voice changed, just slightly. Just enough for Drenna to feel the weight of what came next. "But if you come back, we will not just defend. We will follow you home. And we will bring Earth with us." Drenna ended the communication and sat alone in her quarters for a long time. Then she did something that would end her career and save what was left of her people. She took the full, unedited recording of her conversation with the human captain and transmitted it to every single ship in the fleet. The effect was immediate. The fleet, which had already been cracking under the pressure of losses and fear, shattered. Captains who had been quietly questioning Velas's orders now had proof that surrender was possible, that the humans would let them go. Ships began breaking formation. Some turned and ran toward open space. Others powered down their weapons and sent surrender signals. Arguments erupted on bridges across the fleet. Grand Commander Velas screamed orders that no one followed. He threatened captains who did not respond. He demanded loyalty from officers who had already decided that loyalty to him was not worth dying on a planet that killed everything it touched. The fleet was falling apart. The invasion was over, and Drenna sat in her quarters, listening to the chaos on the communication channels, and felt something she had not felt since the fleet first entered the Sol system. Hope. Not for victory. Victory had never been possible. But hope that some of them, at least, might make it home alive. Grand Commander Velas stood on the bridge of the Throne of Silence and watched his empire die. His fleet was scattering. His soldiers were surrendering, or sick, or dead. His officers were ignoring his orders, and the blue planet below him continued to spin as if nothing important was happening at all. He had one option left, and he knew it was the wrong one. But Velas had built his entire life on the belief that enough force could solve any problem, and he was not the kind of creature who could abandon that belief, even now. "Orbital bombardment," he said quietly. "Target their largest population centers." The officers on the bridge turned and stared at him. Orbital bombardment of civilian targets was a violation of every war convention the hegemony had ever signed. It was the act of a commander who had already lost and wanted to make sure his enemy suffered for the victory. "Grand Commander," one officer said carefully, "the conventions clearly state that—" "I do not care what the conventions state," Velas said. His voice was flat and dead. "Fire." The ships that still followed his orders turned their weapons downward. Energy beams cut through the atmosphere and struck the surface. 12 cities were hit. Buildings crumbled. Fires spread. Smoke rose into the sky in thick black columns that could be seen from orbit. On Baekdu Station, Park Ju-won reported the strikes, with a voice that shook for the first time since the invasion began. He read the names of the cities. He read the estimated casualties. He read the damage reports that were already flooding in from ground stations. Yoon Narai stood perfectly still, her hands flat on her console. Her eyes were fixed on the tactical display. She did not speak. Kwon Tae-sun, in his mountain command center, received the reports and said nothing for a very long time. Then he picked up a photograph that sat on his desk. It was a picture of a street in one of the cities that had just been hit. A street where he had grown up, where his mother still lived. He set the photograph down gently, and his face became something that had no word in any alien language. Captain Han Do-hyun stood at the center of Baekdu Station and absorbed the information the way a stone absorbs rain. It hit him and ran off, and what was left underneath was something harder than anything the hegemony had ever encountered. He opened a communication channel. Every frequency, every language, every ship in orbit, and every station on the ground. "You had a chance to leave," he said. His voice was calm, but it was a different kind of calm now. It was the calm of something that had made a final decision. You were told what this world was. You were told what we were. And you chose to come anyway. You chose to bring war to a species that has been perfecting war since before your civilization learned to build fire. He paused. Now understand what you have done. You have made the people of a Class-15 Deathworld angry. There is nothing in your empire's history that has prepared you for what comes next. The transmission ended, and then the Sol system woke up. The hegemony had believed the system was empty. They had scanned the outer planets and found nothing. They had passed the asteroid belt and detected no threats. They had been right that there were no obvious defenses. They had been wrong about everything else. Weapons platforms on the moon, buried beneath regolith and dust, powered up for the first time in 40 years. Installations on Mars, hidden in canyon walls and beneath polar ice, activated their targeting systems. Arrays in the asteroid belt, disguised as ordinary rocks, began to move. The entire solar system, from Mercury to the Kuiper belt, had been quietly and patiently fortified over the course of 2 centuries. Every platform dark, every weapon cold, every system silent, waiting for a signal that everyone hoped would never need to be sent. Dohan sent the signal. The hegemony fleet found itself caught in a sphere of fire. Kinetic rounds from the asteroid belt struck from above. Directed energy weapons from lunar platforms hit from below. Missiles from Mars arrived in waves that the fleet's point defense systems could not track fast enough. Ships that tried to flee toward open space ran into the outer system platforms. Ships that tried to descend toward Earth ran into Nari's orbital defense grid. There was nowhere to run. The humans had turned their entire solar system into a trap, and the hegemony had walked into it with 12,000 ships and all the confidence of an empire that had never met anything it could not crush. Then came the boarding parties. Quan Taysun had requested and received permission to lead the assault on the Throne of Silence personally. His team launched from Baekdu Station in a fast assault shuttle, crossed the distance to the hegemony flagship in minutes, and breached the hull with cutting charges that burned through alien armor as if it were cloth. The hegemony security forces that met them in the corridors were brave. That had to be acknowledged. They stood their ground and fired their weapons and tried to stop the humans from advancing. But they were fighting creatures that had evolved on a world of nightmares. Taysun's soldiers moved through the ship with a speed and violence that the aliens simply could not match. Human muscles, built to function under Earth's crushing gravity, were impossibly strong in the lighter artificial gravity of the hegemony vessel. Human reflexes, sharpened by millions of years of dodging predators, were faster than anything the defenders had faced. Wounds that should have stopped a soldier only made the humans angrier. Taysun reached the bridge in 22 minutes. He blew the doors open with a breaching charge and stepped through the smoke with his weapon raised. The bridge crew surrendered immediately, all except Velas. The Grand Commander stood at the center of his bridge, unarmed, his uniform still perfect, his posture still straight. He looked at the human who had just torn through his ship like a storm through paper, and he asked the only question he had left. "What are you?" Taysun stopped. He looked at Velas for a long moment. Then he reached up and removed his helmet. His face was scarred. Old scars and new ones. His skin was dark with dirt and bruises. Sweat ran down his forehead. And he was smiling. Not a cruel smile. Not a mocking smile. The simple, tired smile of a man who had done hard work and done it well. "We are what a Class-15 Deathworld makes," he said. "You do not invade a world like ours, Commander. You survive it, if it lets you." Velas said nothing. There was nothing left to say. True to his word, Captain Do-hyun allowed the surviving fleet to leave. Sub-Commander Drenna took command of what remained and guided them home. Of the 12,000 warships that had entered the Sol system with flags raised and weapons ready, 2,200 limped back through hyperspace. Many of them carried sick and wounded soldiers who would never fully recover from their time on Earth. The hegemony did not survive the defeat. Not because the humans came for them. The humans never came. They went back to their world of storms and predators and earthquakes. And they continued to live exactly as they had always lived. The hegemony collapsed because of the story. Every vassal species, every conquered world, every oppressed population learned what had happened. The greatest military force in the galaxy had sent its most powerful fleet against one single planet. And that planet had broken it without ever leaving home. If the hegemony could not defeat one world, then the hegemony could not defeat anything. Rebellions began within months. The empire crumbled within a decade. Shin Eun-ji published a paper on the Galactic Academic Network. She titled it, On the Misclassification of Sapient Deathworld Species, Why the Galaxy Should Have Read the Warning Label. It was translated into 400 languages. It became the most cited document in galactic scientific history. Drenna, now leading the reformed remnants of her people, read the paper 3 times. Then she wrote a single message to Baekdu Station. It said, "Thank you for letting us go." Do-hyun read it. He did not reply. He did not need to. On Earth, life went on. The storms still raged across the oceans. The ground still shook with the movement of ancient plates. The forests still grew dark and deep and full of things with sharp teeth and no mercy. And the humans, scarred and stubborn and unbreakable, rebuilt their damaged cities, buried their dead, petted their dogs, kissed their children, and looked up at the stars with the quiet confidence of a species that had faced the worst the universe could offer, and had answered with 2 simple words. Still here. The galaxy watched, the galaxy learned, the galaxy remembered.